in terms of movies, for Henry IV Part 1 and 2, I really highly recommend the versions that are in that series called The Hollow Crown. Tom Hiddleston plays Prince Hal, Loki from the Avengers, and Thor, The Dark Below, whatever. He's a wonderful actor, and he's absolutely perfect as Prince Hal and as Henry V. And Jeremy Irons plays Henry IV. That is wonderful. So it's cut pretty heavily, but again, I have no hesitations in recommending that. There is an odd version of these plays done by the great actor, director Orson Welles. It's called Chimes at Midnight or Falstaff. He created a Falstaff play out of Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, and Henry V, he plays Falstaff. Didn't need any prosthetic devices to show up fat on screen. It's very strange, heavily cut, rearranged. It could not possibly be your only version to watch, but it has many great aspects to it, not the least of which is Orson Welles' performance as Falstaff, which is unsurpassed, and John Gielgud plays Henry IV. So it's free on YouTube. I just checked, and I just YouTube it, and there it is, the whole of the thing for free. So give it a try. And it does appear to be a good print. There's a problem with many versions of it that the sound isn't synchronized. I had to buy a Brazilian DVD of it to get the sound synchronized, but I think they've got it right on YouTube. Maybe they just used the Brazilian DVD on it. So anyway, as a kind of backup or to see another take, it's a very pro-Falstaff and anti-war version of the film, and it's certainly a chance to see a great performance of Falstaff and of Henry IV. Okay, sorry to have kept you in such suspense here about Henry IV Part 1, but let's try to pick up where we left off. I was suggesting that Shakespeare discovers already in Richard II that the court is no place to grow up if you're going to be a good king. It's a real problem for kings, and we're going to see this again and again, how debilitating the court can be in a ruler's education. It'll be a theme in As You Like It, a theme in King Lear. Shakespeare really sees this problem of flattery as running deep, and so he had the advantage of the legend of Prince Hal's wastrel youth, and used it to suggest there might be a way for a king to avoid the court and, in fact, become a better king as a result and get a better education. We talked about that last time, that Prince Hal is able to deal with the problem of flattery by moving amongst obvious flatterers. He's able to escape many of the pressures of the court that stem from the inevitable tension between a king and a prince, which is peculiarly acute in the case of Henry IV and Prince Hal. And we saw how he learned the language of his people, a very valuable lesson for a king. And I got to the point where I was talking about the two models in Hal's education, Falstaff and Hotspur, and I want to pick up where I left off there and take it from there. It's in many ways takes us to the heart of this play. And I was suggesting, by contrasting their Hal's and Falstaff's and Hotspur's speeches on honor, how they provide the two poles between which Prince Hal moves in this play. That is, Hotspur is the man for whom honor is everything, and he's willing to die for it. And Falstaff is the man who questions the value of honor, who treats it as if it's a mere convention, a mere word, and above all is not willing to die for honor. Hotspur is the kind of man who puts honor above life. Falstaff is the kind of man that puts life above honor. Now, I keep making these very sharp formulations because I think they are basic to understanding the play. Now, I'm offering Shakespeare as a political thinker in this course. I personally would go so far as to be willing to call him a political philosopher. He does write plays, does not write philosophical treatises, and his works aren't organized the way, say, Plato's Republic or Hobbes's Leviathan are. Nevertheless, I do think we can conceptualize what's going on in these plays, and that, judging by the little we've seen thus far, that Shakespeare's mind genuinely seems to work by what we often call binary oppositions. He sets up two opposites and then tries to find a medium between them, or a way of transcending or synthesizing them. So in Richard II, we saw these two forms of kingship. Richard is the legitimate king who doesn't have the nature of a king. He's a king by convention. He's very good giving the appearance of a king, but not good with dealing with the realities of politics. Shakespeare contrasts Richard with Henry Bolingbroke, who is not by convention the king, but does seem to have a kingly nature. He's a great warrior, but will always suffer from the fact that he lacks the legitimacy of a man who was born king. And Shakespeare, as we saw, explored those differences. And as I'll be trying to show in talking about Prince Hal, soon to be Henry V, Shakespeare was looking for some way to mediate between that opposition, between the legitimate king and the usurping king. And you can say the hope for Prince Hal, and it is Henry IV's own hope, is that Hal will be born to the kingship and have the legitimacy of a born king, but will develop the nature of a king as well, that he will be a man with a kingly nature who inherits the kingly throne, and thereby, in the person of Henry V, creates as close to an ideal monarch as I think Shakespeare ever portrayed. Now, I think there's something similar is going on now with the situation with Hotspur and Falstaff as the models for the young Prince Hal. That is, again, they have Falstaff and Hotspur seem like complete opposites. In Hotspur, Shakespeare approaches political life from the perspective of the political man. Hotspur, this is a man for whom politics is everything, and he takes it very seriously, and Shakespeare is willing to take that seriously. And that's why, in fact, he treats Hotspur as a tragic figure and portrays him in poetry. It's as if Shakespeare is willing to take seriously the poetry of politics here, the perspective of the political man for whom politics is everything. On the other hand, the reason Shakespeare is Shakespeare, and the great comprehensive genius that he is he's able simultaneously to adopt a skeptical view of political life in the person of Falstaff. Falstaff, for whom this all looks very suspicious and ultimately empty. For Hotspur, his spirit is everything. He's willing to risk his body to be true to his honor. Falstaff is a man of the body, and not just because he has a very fat one. As we see in his little speech on honor, if honor can't set a leg, if it can't maintain the integrity of the body, then Falstaff will reject it. Falstaff speaks in prose, whereas Hotspur speaks in verse. And he really, this doesn't quite work out fully, but in general in this play, the serious scenes are in blank verse and are tragic. The comic scenes are in prose. And you really see here the beginning of the way we're going to separate out tragedy and comedy in this course, that tragedy takes the perspective of political life very seriously and accepts the notion of honor and of nobility at the face value that political men place upon it. Whereas comedy is a skeptical genre. That's what comedy laughs at the things that politics takes so seriously. And Shakespeare's amazing ability is to combine comedy and tragedy. In his career, he's just about the only major author who is as successful in comedy as he was in tragedies, so that he is not simply the greatest writer of tragedies, but also the greatest writer of comedies. And even more strikingly, he's able to combine comedy and tragedy within a single play, as he does here in Henry IV, as we'll see him do most brilliantly in King Lear. And I'm suggesting he's able to do that because of this dual perspective he's able to adopt, both to plunge himself and us into the realities of politics, to maneuver within the horizons of political life as customarily understood, but also to adopt, in a way, this foreigner's perspective here. Falstaff, to whom all this looks laughable, the things that people die for, that men like Hotspur die for, they seem ridiculous to Falstaff. As we'll see, in some ways that shows Falstaff's limitations, but it also shows the limitations of the political world. And once again, I'm going to suggest that Hal is going to mediate between these two extremes. That he will take honor seriously and indeed fight Hotspur to the death over the issue of who's the most honorable warrior in England. On the other hand, Hal will not be so obsessively, compulsively devoted to honor as Hotspur is, as to allow it to blind him to certain other aspects of life, to certain other realities in the world. And I want to spend a lot of today exploring that contrast, but again, to show you the larger arc here, the point about Hal is that he will learn from both of these men. He will learn to take honor seriously and to adopt Hotspur as a kind of model and to wish to step into Hotspur's shoes, as Falstaff assuredly would not. He might steal his shoes, but he doesn't want to step into them. By the same token, Hal will maintain some kind of distance on political life and see that it's very important, but it isn't everything. And for those purposes, this learning, the critique of honor from Falstaff will be as important to Hal's development as learning how to be an honorable warrior on the model of Hotspur. So again, I think this is how Shakespeare's mind works, and it is very philosophical, that he looks at a spectrum of phenomena here and actually tries to come up with some way of possibly synthesizing them. Now, in particular, I think that the key to having Falstaff and Hotspur as Hal's models is they represent the two great poles of politics that the successful political man needs to deal with. Hotspur represents the great, the nobles, and Falstaff represents the people. Now, Machiavelli has a very interesting passage about that in The Prince. It's chapter 9. I'm going to read you this because in some ways I think it helps to conceptualize for us what's going on in these Henry IV plays. This is page 39 in the translation you have. He who comes to the principality with the aid of the great, he who comes to the principality with the aid of the great maintains himself with more difficulty than one who becomes prince with the aid of the people. And notice Hal's going to enlist the people on his side, because the former finds himself prince with many around him who appear to be his equals, and because of this he can neither command them nor manage them to suit himself. As we see, this is Henry IV's problem. He was just another noble, one of these barons. He came to power through the aid of the other feudal lords, and now they don't like the idea that he's king and they're not. And that's the source of a lot of his trouble in the play. But continue with Machiavelli. But he who arrives in the principality with popular support finds himself alone there, and around him is either no one or very few who are not ready to obey. Besides this, one cannot satisfy the great with decency and without injury to others, but one can satisfy the people. For the end of the people is more decent than that of the great, since the great want to oppress, and the people want not to be oppressed. That's really, I think, a great insight into these Henry IV plays. Hotspur is a very difficult kind of human being to deal with, because as he says in his honor speech, he can't abide rivals. He wants to be the top dog, the alpha male. And how can a king tolerate that when one of his nobles wants to be preeminent in the realm? Falstaff shows the way common people treat life. Now, again, Falstaff is a knight. He is Sir John Falstaff, but everything about him, except maybe his wit, is common. And above all, what Shakespeare shows is that Falstaff's concerns are those of common people. Falstaff is a man of appetites. He is principally interested in food, drink, and sex. He is an erotic character. Eros is the great motivation in his life. We keep hearing about his desires, and we see lists of the food and drink he's consumed, and he has gargantuan appetites. And it's very important that Hal get to know this kind of person. You know, you hang around the court, you may be surrounded by Hotspurs. And everybody seems to be noble and to be concerned with honor and war, and that might give you a very limited perspective on human life. It's very useful for Hal to get out there and meet Falstaff and Poins and Bardolph and Daltersheet and all these other characters in the tavern world, because this is what most of his people are going to see life revolving around. And in particular, it's important for Hal to see that these people don't particularly like government. A guy like Hotspur loves government because he loves governing, and he expects to be ruling, and he likes the idea of people being in charge of things. But what we learn from Falstaff is that most people don't have that kind of ambition. They just want to enjoy life, and so they see government as something that sets limits on them, that doesn't allow them to do what they want to do. For Falstaff, you know, the ultimate image of government would be prohibition. That is, that you'd outlaw alcoholic beverages. And Falstaff would be very annoyed with that. And so one thing we see about him from the beginning is he represents some kind of spirit that's antithetical to government itself. We see this in his first dialogue with Hal on pages 8 and 9, so Act 1, Scene 2, start around line 23. Marry then, sweet wag, when thou art king. And notice this motif that's there from the beginning of the play. It's very important that everybody anticipates that Hal will become king. This is one of the reasons there's such pressure on Hal, that everyone's trying to maneuver him. They're trying to get what they can out of him. This is one reason he's been driven to Eastcheap in these taverns, where this is more transparent. That Falstaff openly talks about what he hopes to gain when Hal is king. At the court, the courtiers would be more subtle. When thou art king, let us not that are squires of the night's body be called thieves of the day's beauty. Let us be Diana's foresters, gentlemen of the shade, minions of the moon, and let men say we be men of good government, being governed as the sea is by our noble and chaste mistress the moon, under whose countenance we steal. This is a hint here of the kind of moral or immoral revolution that Falstaff would like to bring about, being the sort of prime minister under Hal's kingship. He wants to rename everything. And in particular, he doesn't want people to be called criminals anymore. In fact, the people who have been called criminals, they should now become the government. They should be the men of good government. These are all paradoxes. Men of good government here are obviously what would normally be thought of as men of bad government. That is, people who don't want to be governed by the state who want to, for example, be allowed to steal. That's a pretty major conception of what the role of the government is, that it should endorse thieves. And indeed, we see how England is being transformed in this play. We get these little hints in connection with the robbery of the travelers. We're entering in the anarchy that's resulted from the shaking of Richard II's regime. We're now seeing, for example, that the guys who run the inns, the hotel keepers, they're in cahoots with the robbers. This is that Gad's Hill scene. We see that this is a world in which you're not safe in your bed at night. The guy that should be keeping order, the guy that's running the inn, he's actually planning your robbery the next day. This is pretty serious stuff. We see how the weakening of the Richard II regime has produced a kind of anarchy on the roads here where people aren't safe traveling. Now again, all of this is very funny, and there's a kind of holiday spirit to it, but I do want you to see from the beginning, this is dangerous stuff in political terms, so that on page 9, at around 60, Falstaff continues this motif, but I prithee, sweet wag, shall there be gallows standing in England when thou art king, and resolution thus fubbed as it is with the rusty curb of old Father Antic the law? Dost not thou, when thou art king, hang a thief? So we're going to see here that the premise of Falstaff's government is anti-government. There should be no punishment for thievery. Hal should not hang a thief. You will see in Henry V, when Hal, as king, does consent to hang a thief, and it will be Bardolph. In fact, Hal will understand when he's king that one thing a king has to do is punish crime. But Falstaff here would like to enter a kind of fully comic world here, where we no longer have the rusty curb of old Father Antic the law. He is profoundly antinomian, we would say. And it's part of the spirit of comedy to be a kind of carnival spirit. The world of comedy is a world where we're no longer bound by those silly old rules and conventions that normally govern our lives. We will see this when we get to Shakespeare's comedies, Midsummer Night's Dream, As You Like It, Twelfth Night. This is the great theme of Shakespearean comedy. It is a kind of carnivalesque shaping up of the world. Let's get rid of those silly rules that stand in the way of fulfilling our desires. And especially in the comedies, we'll see this work out in terms of young lovers who are tired of old people, namely their parents, telling them who they cannot love. And they want to be free of that. And the spirit of comedy is the spirit of freedom, especially of that old Antic, the law, the sense that our customs are a heavy weight upon us and are blocking our desires. Falstaff stands for a liberation of the desires. It's why in some ways he's so attractive to us. It's why also he's such a dangerous figure as well. Now, we'll say some more about Falstaff, a lot more about Falstaff as we go along. But let me turn to Hotspur as a contrast to this. I do want you to see Falstaff represents the apolitical element in human life. The desires, the erotic impulses, everything that's resistant to the law, to convention, to everything that's resistant to those efforts to curb the desires to create an orderly world. And again, you can see from the start, Hal can't simply surrender to that world. It's important he learn about it. It's important that he gain an appreciation for that side of human life. But as king, he's going to have to limit and restrain that aspect. And so poised against Falstaff in this world is this figure of Hotspur, who is a kind of hypertrophy of political man carried to a higher power. And I want to examine him at length because he is one of Shakespeare's early and extraordinary portraits of what goes to make up a political man. And what we see here in particular is anger. Hotspur is this man characterized by anger. And we see that from the very beginning, pages 17 and 18, so Act 1, Scene 3, where we learn that Bolingbroke, Henry IV, is angry because Hotspur did not turn over his prisoners to him. And Hotspur explains what happened. And what happened was he encountered a courtier and got very angry with him. So this is page 17, Act 1, Scene 3, about line 32. When I was dry with rage and extreme, there it is from the beginning, with rage. It's what characterizes this man. And extreme toil, breathless and faint, leaning upon his sword, came there a certain lord, neat and trimly dressed, fresh as a bridegroom, and his chin new reaped, showed like a stubble, a land at harvest home. He was perfumed like a milliner. And twixt his finger and his thumb he held a pouncet box, which ever and anon he gave his nose and took it away again. So it's this foppish courtier whom Hal despises. This kind of figure appears again and again in Shakespeare. You'll see him in King Lear, most famously in the figure of Osric in Hamlet. Shakespeare did hang around the court. Again, there was a lot of interaction between his theater company and the court. His theater company was initially sponsored by the Lord Chamberlain, a very powerful man in Elizabeth's court. Later was sponsored by King James. Many of these plays were staged at court functions. I have no doubt that at some point or another Shakespeare spoke to Queen Elizabeth, but he was very close to the Earl of Southampton, who was a kind of patron to him. So he certainly knew courtiers, and one thing he appears to have despised is the type of person who's just a creature of the court. And what we see in this scene is very important because we see the two types of figures that did appear at court then. On the one hand, there were the men like Hotspur, the great nobles, and that means the great warriors at this time. The people that any king depended on to win his battles. But at the same time, there were creatures of the court, people who were simply courtiers, who had nothing going for them except their ability to ingratiate themselves with the monarch and to be fashionable, well-dressed and well-perfumed and so on. And really, this is a very important speech for setting up this contrast, and you see that Shakespeare appears to side with the true nobles, the true warriors. And we see it in this whole portrait of this nameless courtier taking snuff, line 40 on page 17. And still he smiled and talked, and as the soldiers bore dead bodies by, he called them untaught knaves, unmannerly, to bring a slovenly, unhandsome corpse betwixt the wind and his nobility. This is so great. The contrary, I mean, here are the real soldiers who are dealing with death, who are fighting to the death on the battlefield for the sake of the king. And here's this courtier coming along who can't stand the smell of corpses and is insulted because he has to deal with dead bodies on the battlefield. And that's in contrast to his nobility. Now, that's a false nobility for Shakespeare, as it is for Hotspur. We're continuing with many holiday and lady terms. He questioned me, amongst the rest demanded my prisoners in your majesty's behalf. And this is why Hotspur says he turned him down. He was so disgusted and annoyed with his courtier. Line 51, and my impatience answered neglectingly, I know not what. He should or he should not, for he made me mad. Again, this is the man of anger. To see him shine so brisk and smell so sweet and talk so like a waiting gentlewoman of guns and drums and woods, God save the monarch, and telling me the soundest thing on earth was Parmaceti for an inward bruise, and that it was a great pity, so it was, this villainous saltpeter should be digged out of the bowels of the harmless earth, which many a good tall fellow had destroyed so cowardly, and but for these vile guns, he would himself have been a soldier. Amazing. Here's this courtier. He's not a soldier. He's not out there fighting with the heroes on the battlefield. And why? Because he doesn't like guns. He feels they're unfair. Now, this is interesting and a very important point, a great transition in warfare in Europe. We'll talk about it a bit in connection with Henry V and the Battle of Agincourt. But this was a turning point around Shakespeare's lifetime when firearms were beginning to replace swords and knives and even bows and arrows. And what guns turned out to be was a great equalizer. That is, up until the time of firearms, you generally had these nobles who were great swordsmen, amazing physical specimens, evidently, and one noble could, handle 40 ordinary people in a sword battle. Just have to watch some samurai movie, you'll see that work out. But it is true historically that gunpowder and guns changed this, where on any given Sunday, anybody with a gun could defeat any knight on horseback. We'll see something analogous happen in Henry V. Shakespeare is very aware of this, how technology changes warfare and actually threaten the continuation of nobility. Very interesting he brings up this passage. You see this in a lot of writing at this time, in Samuel Daniels' The Civil Wars, which is one of the sources for this play. He has a scene where gunpowder is invented by the devil, something that John Milton picks up on in Paradise Lost as well. It was a motif in the late Renaissance to see guns and gunpowder as a diabolical invention because it was transforming the nature of nobility. In any case, we see here the kind of contrast that was going on already in Shakespeare's day. He had a strong sense that in Elizabeth's court, there were some people who were mere courtiers, who were there because they danced well or wrote good poetry and could charm Queen Elizabeth. And then there were these other men, the Hotspur types, who were there because they were genuine soldiers. Now, it's interesting, this whole scene, Act 1, Scene 3, because it begins with the issue of claiming a warrior's prisoners. The king is asking for the booty that Hotspurs won. How many of you were familiar with Homer's The Iliad? Does it remind you of anything in that? It's actually the same place where the Iliad begins. The Iliad begins, the whole Iliad is the story of Achilles' wrath, of Achilles' anger. And what sparks his anger is when King Agamemnon wants Achilles' concubine from him, Briseis. Agamemnon has had to give up his concubine, whom he won in war, and now he's going to take Achilles away from him, and that makes Achilles so angry he wants to kill Agamemnon. And I keep thinking there's an association here in Shakespeare's mind. We'll talk about this when we get to Henry V, the extent to which he may have been trying to write the English epic when he wrote these history plays. Some people speak of these plays as the Henriad, as if this was the Iliad. It was the English epic of King Henry. And it is interesting that we have that same motif here. Hotspur is an Achilles-like figure because he withdraws from the side he's fighting on. He kind of goes off and sulks in the same kind of anger that Achilles does. Now, there's more backing for my conjecture here, the connection of this to the Iliad, because this play is often dated to 1598, 1599. There was a renewed interest in Homer in Shakespeare's England at just around this time. Some of you may have heard of George Chapman. He's best known because of a sonnet that John Keats wrote called On First Looking into Chapman's Homer. Chapman produced the first great translation into the English language of the Iliad and later the Odyssey. And he began publishing it in 1598, which is just around the time of this play. And he published 7 books of Homer's Iliad at that time. Later went on to complete it and to do the Odyssey as well. What's particularly interesting in light of what we were talking about last time, and we will talk about several times in the future, is George Chapman dedicated this publication of his translation of the Iliad to the Earl of Essex. Same man who I said last time had Richard II staged at the point when he was trying to lead a rebellion against Queen Elizabeth. Now, that was several years later in 1601. But Chapman quite fulsomely dedicated his translation of the Iliad to the Earl of Essex, whom he refers to in the dedication as the now living instance of the Achillean virtues. That's how Chapman was trying to present the Earl of Essex in 1598. What I'm saying is there was already a literary association between the Iliad and the Earl of Essex. The Earl of Essex, who stood for the war party in the Elizabethan court, if you will. Again, there were other people, in fact, the more established people, the Cecils, who were in effect prime ministers, they were for a more cautious policy against Spain. Remember, Spain had almost conquered England when it sent its armada. Only bad weather prevented England from being conquered by Spain then. It was people like Essex who wanted to take the war to Spain. And it was pretty evident to people when Chapman published this translation of the Iliad that he was celebrating the great heroic virtues that Homer embodied in his figure of Achilles, and saying, look, we got a example of that right here in England, the Earl of Essex. Now, I'm not saying Hotspur is the Earl of Essex. Again, I don't think Shakespeare operates that way, but I do want to suggest, and we will come back to this more powerfully in Henry V, to some extent even in Henry IV, Part 2, that behind these plays is some contemporary force, and that there was a division in Elizabeth's court between these kind of foppish courtiers that Hotspur portrays here, who kind of turned their nose up at war and didn't have the heroic qualities, and then these types like Essex, who people like Chapman and I would argue Shakespeare were celebrating as the genuine nobles who could lead a great future for England. And again, that little glimpse we get in here of the resentment of the true warrior against the mere courtier who's afraid of the battlefield, I think that would have had quite a bit of resonance for Shakespeare's audience. Now, continuing with Shakespeare's portrait of Hotspur, if you turn to page 20, so this is Act 1, Scene 3, about line 127, Northumberland says of him, what, drunk with choler? Now, that's drunk with anger there. Now, it's interesting. Falstaff is drunk with drink. Indeed, Falstaff and a lot of other characters in this play are drunks. And it's something you expect of these erotic types, that they indulge their appetites, and one of them is for liquor. Here we see the other possibility, if you will. You could be drunk with choler. There's this other irrational side to human nature that manifests itself in Hotspur in his anger. And we see that marvelously on page 23. So Act 1, Scene 3, about line 212. Hotspur is just this powder keg of anger. Line 212, I'll keep them all. By God, he shall not have a Scot of them. No, if a Scot would save his soul, he shall not. I'll keep them by this hand. You start away and lend no ear unto my purposes. Those prisoners you shall keep. Nay, I will. That's flat. He said he would not ransom Mortimer, forbade my tongue to speak of Mortimer, but I will find him when he lies asleep, and in his ear I'll holler, Mortimer! Nay, I'll have a starling shall be taught to speak nothing but Mortimer, and give it him to keep his anger still in motion. This is a man who thinks only in terms of anger. Wonderful. He even will get angry and argue with a letter. Shakespeare's so good at capturing this aspect of this kind of political man. This is page 35. So Act 2, Scene 3, where Hotspur enters reading a letter. But for mine own part, my lord, I could be well contented to be there in respect of the love I bear your house. He could be contented. Why is he not then? In respect of the love he bears our house, he shows in this he loves his own barn better than he loves our house. Let me see some more. The purpose you undertake is dangerous. Why, that's certain. 'Tis dangerous to take a cold, to sleep, to drink. But I tell you, my lord fool, out of this nettled danger, we pluck this flower's safety. You know, we're scholars. We read things calmly. We take in what they're saying. This guy can't read one sentence without getting anger and shouting at it. And it all goes together in Shakespeare's portrait here. If you turn to the next page, so still in Act 2, Scene 3, about line 36, his wife enters. How now, Kate? I must leave you within these 2 hours. What a way to speak to your wife. And indeed, she reveals, line 38, Oh, my good lord, why are you thus alone? For what offense have I this fortnight been a banished woman from my Harry's bed? Tell me, sweet lord, what is it that takes from thee thy stomach pleasure and thy golden sleep? Well, the answer is his anger. And here we see how different this man Hotspur is from Falstaff. Falstaff is drunk with drink and he's drunk with sex. Those are the two main concerns he has. Here's a man who's been neglecting his wife for 2 weeks because he's so angry. And indeed, Falstaff stands for the erotic drives. Hotspur is something different, something opposed to that. And Shakespeare associates it with horses. There's a kind of horsiness to Hotspur. This is page 38. So still in Act 2, Scene 3, line 75. We're hearing him reject his wife here. But hear ye, my lord, what sayest thou, my lady? What is it carries you away? Why, my horse, my love, my horse. And we see he cares more for his horse than his wife. Line 90. Away, away, you trifler. Love, I love thee not. I care not for thee, Kate. This is no world to play with mammoths and to tilt with lips. We must have bloody noses and crack crowns and pass them current to God's me, my horse. A man who's so horsey that he prefers his horse to his wife. Now, we don't have a perfect word in English for this quality, but there is a word in Greek that I'll teach you. We all know this term. Am I on here? Eros from Greek. There's another term, thumos. These are the two sides of the soul, as Plato presents it in the Republic. And I think Shakespeare is working with a Platonic model of the soul here in these characters. That standing behind this play is the Platonic understanding of the soul, and particularly the two irrational parts of the soul. One of them we're very familiar with, Eros, and that's what's represented by Falstaff. This is a man of the appetites, the desires. He's always trying to ingest things, indulge in things. Hotspur represents another side of the human soul. Plato calls thumos. It's a word that actually goes all the way back to Homer. Thumos is that part of the soul that makes people get angry, that makes them get indignant, to care about their dignity, as we see so much with Hotspur. It's whatever there is in human beings that makes them beat their chests. Indeed, in Homer, when you see this word thumos, it's imaged as being in the chest. It's something inside the chest that boils over with rage and anger. And again, Achilles is a great portrait of this quality in the human soul, and Hotspur is as well. Again, I'm kind of sneaking in all these concepts from political theory for you in the course. It is a course in theory, and so we've been doing a lot with Machiavelli. Here's some stuff with Plato. Now, I think Shakespeare's understanding of the soul is very similar to Plato's. Now, there's three parts of the soul in Plato, and one of them is called reason, logos, the word from which we get logical. It refers to the spoken word, the calculating part of the soul. Incidentally, again, how many of you have read Plato's Republic? Okay, good. The actual technical terms in Plato for the parts of the soul are somewhat more complicated. What I'm calling logos, Plato calls logistikon, and what I'm calling thumos, he calls thumoides, and what I'm saying is eros, he calls epithumetikon, but they're related to these words, and let's not get too complicated here. These are the more common Greek words for the terms. But Plato sees the soul is divided into three parts: logos, reason, a logical part, and then these two irrational forces. We generally think today that all the irrational forces are summed up in the erotic drives, but Plato notices, and I think Shakespeare notices, there's something in the soul that's irrational, but actually resists the erotic desires. That when people get angry, they do get carried away with it, and they do forget about the things they love and the things they desire. It's what Shakespeare shows so strongly here in Hotspur, that this man can reject the embraces of his wife because he's too angry. And so again, in Plato, as I think there are in Shakespeare, and again, we'll see this throughout the plays we're looking at, there isn't just an erotic side to human nature. There's also this thumotic side, and it's peculiarly characteristic of political men. The term I'll generally use to translate thumos into English, and by the way, thumos you'll often see spelled Thymos as well, but I'll use the term spiritedness. That this reflects this spiritedness, because there's an interesting connection between this stuff thumos, or spiritedness, and public spiritedness. The nature of this particular side of the soul is that it can attach human beings to politics, to public life. That's why one of the manifestations of anger is indignation. People get angry about things and they want to change them, they want to fight over them. The most characteristic impulse of thumos is to draw a line in the sand and say, step over that line. And if you step over that line, I'm going to punch you out. That's the characteristic thumotic gesture, and we're going to look at it in a minute among these very thumotic men. But anyway, I'll keep coming back to this, and especially when we get to the Tempest, but we'll see it in King Lear, again, where King Lear speaks about noble anger. There's a profound connection in Shakespeare, as there is in Plato, between nobility and anger. Nobles are the type of people who get angry over things and who are therefore very contentious. And again, Shakespeare is trying to show it in almost a pure form in Hotspur. Because in many ways, thumos is the political problem. It's the problem in Plato's Republic. It's the problem here in Shakespeare's plays. You need people like Hotspur if you're a king. Look what Hotspur does. He goes out and he wins your battles for you. And you don't win battles out of your erotic desires. We see that in the case of Falstaff. Desire for food and sex does not drive you into battle, because, as Falstaff quickly recognizes, war is contrary to his erotic interests. The desires are anchored in the body. If you lose your body, you lose your desires. There's some irrational element to human beings that will allow some of them to fight to the death, to risk their lives for something. And what is it? It's their honor. And we see that in Hotspur. Now, Shakespeare recognizes the importance of this thumos, the spiritedness, this irrational part of the soul. It's what makes people political. It's what any regime needs, because it needs warriors, but it's very difficult to control. It's what makes a man like Hotspur such a problem to King Henry. Again, Hotspur can't live with him, can't live without him. You need him to win your battles, but then he's going to direct his anger against you if he doesn't feel he's sufficiently honored. So it's very important that Shakespeare can appreciate this. He carries it almost over the top in Hotspur. So much so that he allows Hal to make fun of it. Just a little bit later, it's page 43. So Act 2, Scene 4, about line 102. Now again, here's a speech in prose, and it's what's going on all this time. We get Hotspur's spiritedness presented in all this glorious poetry of war. And then we get it counterpointed by this prose of Hal on page 43. Get about line 102. I am not yet of Percy's mind, the Hotspur of the North. He that kills me some 6 or 7 dozen of Scots at a breakfast, washes his hands, and says to his wife, Fie upon this quiet life, I want work. Oh, my sweet Harry, says she, how many hast thou killed today? Give my roan horse a drench, says he, and answers, some 14 an hour after, a trifle. I prithee call him Falstaff, I'll play Percy. Fascinating speech, and again, this is the kind of thing that only Shakespeare does. He's really risking something here. He's making fun of his own hero. He's presenting Hotspur as this heroic figure, and Hotspur has to be heroic to make Hal all the more heroic when he defeats him on the battlefield at the end. But this is, if you will, the Falstaffian side of Hal here. It's a sign of what Falstaff has learned. Not to take these heroic guys as seriously as they take themselves. To realize there's something crazy about them. It's important that Hal can speak in prose and in comic prose of Hotspur, because this is what I mean when I say he will embrace what's important, what's good in Hotspur, but not fully become Hotspur. He will not become this kind of irrationally thumotic man, a man who is totally controlled by his anger, rather than be in control of it. Now, in the Platonic model, ideally, Logos is in control of the other 2 aspects of the soul, and in particular, in Plato's Republic, the thumos is the characteristic of the guardian class, the warriors, and Logos manages to get thumos on its side in controlling Eros. In the Republic, Shakespeare presents thumos as this aspect that can be used positively by the logical part of the soul to control the erotic desires. As we'll see, Hal is ultimately a pretty logical type. His reason is in control of his passions, and he will never surrender to anger the way Hotspur does. And it's a very good sign, therefore, that he can make fun of him, that he understands when thumos can get out of control. And in particular, notice the line, I'll play Percy. This is a key to the logic of this whole work, that Hal will accomplish what he does through play acting. That he will play the role of Percy, play the role of Hotspur when he has to. We'll see in a little while he plays the role of his father, Henry IV, when he has to. In some ways, the key to Hal's success will be his ability to act. It's no accident that Shakespeare may have looked upon acting as an important skill. Shakespeare was himself an actor. But here the idea that the key for Hal is to play the role of Hotspur. We've just seen him do it. He can get into the role. It's amazing how much this sounds like the Hotspur we've just seen in the earlier scene. Hal is able to capture his accents here. We recognize that this is the guy we just saw with his wife. It will be Hal's genius that he can play at these various roles. He can play at being the noble warrior. He can play at being the king. He will do it convincingly. As we saw, Richard II was very good at playing the king. He could put on a good show, give the appearance of a king. Bolingbroke, Henry IV, has not been so good at that. Hal's going to be very good at it. Indeed, we learned from the beginning he's staging this whole business of his truancy, of his being away from court in order to create a good impression. So he does have to learn how to play parts. It's just that he must remember that they're parts and not get so absorbed in the parts that the parts take him over. He will be a noble warrior. He will be a heroic figure, but not in that fully irrational way that Hotspur is, because that's dangerous. Let me continue a bit more with Shakespeare's portrayal of Hotspur, and in general of the nature of these thumatic or spirited men. We next see it in Act 3 when Hotspur and Worcester and Mortimer and Glendower get together to plan this rebellion against Henry IV. And again, Shakespeare admires nobles, admires great warriors. We see a lot to admire in these figures, but there's just enough of that comic perspective in Shakespeare's portrayal to remind us what's wrong with these types, how they can get out of hand, how they can let their emotions get out of hand, and specifically how they can let their anger get out of hand. Again, Shakespeare walks a very thin line in this play of giving these guys their poetry and giving them their heroic poetry and making us respond to their nobility, and yet creating a sufficient distance that we see there's something limited about them. So turn to page 60, and we meet this Welshman, Owen Glendower. We've been hearing about him, and he's a frightening figure. And here Hotspur's going to momentarily play the role of Falstaff in this scene. This is Act 3, Scene 1, about line 12. Glendower, Hotspur said, and you and Hal, as often as he hears Owen Glendower spoken of, the king's afraid of Owen Glendower. And Glendower modestly says, I cannot blame him. At my nativity, the front of heaven was full of fiery shapes, of burning cressets, and at my birth, the frame and huge foundation of the earth shaken like a coward. Again, I hope you can hear the poetry in there. This is, heroic poetry. It's almost epic poetry here. The front of heaven was full of fiery shapes, burning cressets. And Hotspur, in prose, says, why, so it would have done at the same season if your mother's cat had but kittened, though yourself had never been born. I say the earth did shake when I was born, and I say the earth was not of my mind, if you supposed, as fearing you it shook. The heavens were all on fire, the earth did tremble. Now, it's a strange moment here, and it shows in a way how far we've advanced from Richard II. What Glendower is claiming here is nothing different from what Richard II claimed in his play, The Divine Right of Kingship. There, Richard was claiming that his rule is rooted in the order of nature, that there are natural manifestations of the divinity of his kingship. That was the medieval notion. That kingship isn't a human institution, that something deeper in the very frame of nature, stood behind it. And that's the claim Glendower is making here for himself. It's in a way, we're starting to see the last gasps of the medieval worldview here. And it's interesting, Hotspur, who in many ways is very much a part of this world, and gave a great medieval speech about honor and chivalry and going to the moon and all that. He plays the skeptical role here. Why? Because Hotspur will be willing to say these things about himself, but he won't stand there and listen to another man claim this kind of divine status. And so it's very interesting. We see the entire movement of these plays is one of secularization, that is, of taking this divine regime of Richard II and gradually secularizing. We saw Bolingbroke say to those traders, "I don't care about your souls. I'm just going to deal with your bodies." And so here, we hear Glendower's speeches here as boasting, as if indeed we're to take this as just him making up. But this continues on page 62, so about line 52. Glendower is still in this mode. "I can call spirits from the vasty deep." Hotspur says, "Why, so can I, or so can any man, but will they come when you do call for them?" That is so marvelous. These are famous lines here, but the puncturing of these pretensions of that medieval idea of kingship or rulership that involves the spirits from the vasty deep. And then indeed we see what's going on here. Glendower has come in talking like, again, he's from King Arthur's court. Later, Hotspur, this is on page 65, line 149, talking about what Glendower says. He speaks of the dreamer Merlin. Hotspur associates Glendower with King Arthur's court. This figure, again, already sounding a lot more archaic and anachronistic than Richard II did. This kind of rhetoric, which still was in place when Richard II began, already it's beginning to sound hollow, even to a man like Hotspur. And what are they there for? To divide up the spoils. Glendower comes out talking like he's out of King Arthur's court, and they got a map there. And they're going to divide up the kingdom. And this is that business of drawing lines. And we see how these thumatic men react. Each one is concerned with his own dignity. And I'm not getting enough out of this deal, page 64. Hotspur's noticed that the boundary line cuts off some really nice farmland from his territory. And so line 112, have it so, a little change will do it. Glendower, I'll not have it altered. Will not you? No, nor you shall not. Who shall say me nay? Why, that will I. And there you see it, that there's two spirited men just thumping on their chests, and I want the line here. No, I want the line there. It's also interesting that it gets into a argument about the fact that Glendower is Welsh. We'll talk about these various nationalities more when we get to Henry V. But it's particularly interesting that we see here, Hotspur doesn't like poetry when he hears about Glendower singing, as all the Welsh do so well. Line 128, I'd rather be a kitten and cry mew than one of these same meter ballad mongers. I'd rather hear a brazen candlestick turn on a dry wheel grate on the axle tree, and that would set my teeth nothing on edge, nothing so much as mincing poetry. Now these thumatic men, they speak in poetry, they speak in elevated poetry, but they don't like poets. They don't like poetry, and above all, they don't like other people speaking in poetry. And again, you can see Shakespeare suggesting some of the limits to this kind of spirited man. He has no appreciation of poetry. And of course, the argument goes on and on over the map, and it threatens to break down their whole argument here. And when, top of 65, line 135, when Glendower concedes, "Come, you shall have returned," Hotspur says, "I do not care." It's so typical of these spirited men. He really didn't care about the land. He just cared about his dignity. He wasn't getting enough. "I'll give thrice so much land to any well-deserving friend, but in the way of bargain, mark you me, I'll cavil on the ninth part of a hair." Again, I'm dwelling on this because it's important from the start here to see Shakespeare's portrait of the political man here. And this is so characteristic of it, that it's so marvelous portrayed here with this map and the drawing of the lines. And you don't care about the land itself. What you care is that someone else got more. This is, again, is what makes these Thumonic men so dangerous. When Hotspur says, I won't brook any rivals. You know this isn't going to work already here. These three guys are dividing up Henry IV's kingdom, but how long is that going to last before each of these guys is going to want what the other guy has here? And so we see here this problematic of Thumos, and again, it provokes Worcester into speaking of two moralities here. And I keep emphasizing that Shakespeare understands the complexity of moral questions because there can be two wholly different moral perspectives. So you turn to page 66. Worcester has pretty much had it with Hotspur and his anger. So this is page 66, Act 3, C1, about line 176. "In faith, my lord, you are too willful blame. And since your coming hither hath done enough to put him quite beside his patience, you must needs learn, Lord, to amend this fault. Though sometimes it show greatness, courage, blood, and that's the dearest grace it renders you, yet oftentimes it doth present harsh rage, defective manners, want of government, pride, haughtiness, opinion, and disdain, the least of which, haunting a nobleman, loses men's hearts." And here's this dual perspective on the same phenomenon. This is the thumos of the noble, his spiritedness, his anger, and this is what makes him great. It's what makes him courageous. It's everything we admire in a warrior. Achilles, the model of the warrior, just filled with these characteristics. And yet there's another perspective on it, in which this appears to be harsh rage, in which it appears to be pride and haughtiness. Now that's a Christian perspective on it. What looks noble in one figure, from one perspective, looks like a vice from another. Now remember, we just saw this in Richard II, in Act 1, Scene 2 of that, these lines, it's lines 33 to 4, that which in mean men we entitle patience is pale, cold cowardice in noble breasts. It's the same idea here. Something that we call greatness and courage, we also call harsh rage, pride, and haughtiness. These two perspectives are what create tragedies here, because again, what looks noble and looks like a virtue from one perspective appears to be vice and evil from another. Now, in particular, I've been talking about these two moralities. I mentioned the slave morality and mass morality in Friedrich Nietzsche. Let me go to Machiavelli to give more background on this, because Shakespeare associates these two different views with the classical or ancient world, the world of the Greeks and Romans, and the modern world, Christianity. What looks like courage and nobility to the ancient world looks like pride and evil in the modern Christian world. Now, this Shakespeare could have found in Machiavelli. I'm going to read you fairly extended passage from Machiavelli's Discourses on the first 10 books of Livy, his other great work. I would have assigned them both, but trying to keep you reading fairly short here. So this is from Book 2, Chapter 2 of the Discourses. Machiavelli is contrasting the ancient pagan world, which he's writing about when he's writing about ancient Rome, with the modern Christian world. Thinking then whence it can arise that in those ancient times people were more lovers of freedom than in these. I believe it arises from the same cause that makes men less strong now. Machiavelli looks back at particularly the ancient Romans, and they care for freedom, independence. They're stronger. Why? Well, because they're not Christians, which I believe is the difference between our education and the ancient, founded on the difference between our religion and the ancient. For our religion, and Machiavelli adds, having shown the truth and the true way, makes us esteem less the honor of the world, whereas the Gentiles, the pagans, esteeming it very much and having placed the highest good in it, were more ferocious in their actions. So the ancients, particularly the Romans, were devoted to honor. They were devoted to glory. They cared about martial virtue because they cared about honor in this world. And Machiavelli goes on to explain this at some length. The ancient religion did not beatify men, did not make saints out of men, if they were not full of worldly glory, as were captains of armies and princes of republics. Ancient Romans celebrated the nobility of princes. Our religion has glorified humble and contemplative more than active men. You notice this is that same idea as in Richard II. There's two perspectives here, and that which in mean men we entitle patience is pale, cold cowardice in noble breasts. Our religion has glorified humble and contemplative more than active men. It has then placed the highest good in humility, abjectness, and contempt of things human. The other, the ancient Romans, placed it in greatness of spirit, strength of body, and all other things capable of making men very strong. And if our religion asks that you have strength in yourself, it wishes you to be capable more of suffering than of doing something strong. This mode of life thus seems to have rendered the world weak and given it in prey to criminal men who can manage it securely, seeing that the collectivity of men, so as to go to paradise, think more of enduring their beatings than of avenging them. That was Richard II's problem, his martyr complex, his eagerness to suffer rather than to fight back. He's truly a man who thought more of enduring his beatings than of avenging them. Anyway, Machiavelli draws this contrast, and I think it's very important to Shakespeare as well. That, as we'll see at many points, particularly in Henry V, Shakespeare associates these noble types, these spirited men, with the ancient world, with the heroes of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. And that's what sets up this dialectic in Shakespeare between two moralities, two views of what is good. One is this noble view that what good is being strong, defeating your enemies, being the most famous man in the world. Now, in Christianity, all those things look like sins. That's pride. That's aggressiveness. As I like to put, the Christian principle is the meek shall inherit the world. Homer's principle was the Greek shall inherit the world. And that contrast runs throughout the ancient world. That what's celebrated in the Iliad, the Odyssey, to some extent even in Virgil's Aeneid, is this kind of heroic warrior's attitude. It's what the ancients looked up to. It's one reason why they were such great warriors. Obviously, Christianity developed in contrast to this. And Shakespeare, like many of his Renaissance contemporaries, was aware of the way the modern world had redefined certain virtues. Here's a passage from the French writer Rabelais in his famous Gargantua and Pantagruel. Character says, such imitations of the ancient heroes, Hercules, Alexander, Hannibal, Scipio, Caesar, and so on, is contrary to the teachings of our gospel. Imitating the ancient heroes is contrary to the teaching of our gospel. And what the barbarians once dubbed prowess, we now call brigandage and evildoing. That's so perfect. Again, it's just like what in mean men is called cowardice, in noble spirits is celebrated. So what the barbarians, what the ancients once dubbed prowess, we now call it brigandage and evil doing. So this is one thing that's emerging in these history plays, and we'll see this develop very much in Henry V as well. So what we're seeing then is that in Hotspur we see everything that's good about Thomas, everything that makes a political man so powerful. At the same time, though, we're seeing what limits it. Now, it all builds up to the most Achilles-like moment in Hotspur's speeches. This is bottom of page 105. So Act 5, Scene 2, about line 80. They're going into battle and letters arrive. Now, Hotspur should stop and read those letters. They could be really important. They could say, help is on its way. They could say, help's not on its way. I mean, here you see Hotspur's spiritedness interfering with his facing up to reality, which I think is his real problem here. I cannot read them now. Along with his anger goes a certain kind of hastiness. Oh, gentlemen, the time of life is short. To spend that shortness basely were too long if life did ride upon a dial's point, still ending at the arrival of an hour. And if we live to tread on kings, and if die, brave death when princes die with us. Now for our consciences the arms are fair, when the intent of bearing them is just. Basically, Hotspur affirms the famous choice of Achilles. Remember, Achilles is given the choice to live a long life, but an inglorious one, or to live a short and glorious life. That's the great choice he has, and he embraces the choice of the short but glorious life. And here, oh gentlemen, the time of life is short. To spend that shortness basely were too long if life did ride upon the dial's point. This is, in many ways, the definition of the tragic choice. We will see it repeated in romantic terms in Romeo, for example, in a couple of weeks, where he wants an intense but brief love rather than a long but calm and easygoing love. This is what the tragic hero does. He chooses, as Achilles does, the short but glorious life, the moment of intensity. And it's what makes these figures heroic, is why we admire them. They do something spectacular. And yet, as it works out here, it turns out to be catastrophic for Hotspur and for the men who follow them. So we see, again, I think Shakespeare develops Hotspur's character at great length, showing the nature of this political man and showing the tragic nature of it. Okay, let me pause here. I've got about 5 minutes to go. Let me take any questions you have thus far. Anybody have any questions? Okay, I'll just take a few more minutes then. We're making good progress here. I'll just set us up for next time. What I want to look at next time is how Falstaff counterpoints all this. And it will help us develop this sense of the contrast between a comic view of life and the tragic view of life. On every one of these points, Falstaff will be the opposite of Hotspur, and the point again always will be that Hal embrace both sides. And in particular, this play creates an amazing dialectic between the battle scenes or the scenes among the nobles, which are generally in verse, and the scenes among the low life in the taverns. And it's something I want to look at and think about it as you're thinking this over. That is, what we've got here is two contrasting worlds, and they're in an amazing counterpoint where they both criticize each other and reinforce each other. That is, on the one hand, a lot of this play goes to create an equivalence between the low life and the high life. There's a deep current of skepticism about nobility and war in the play, so that, for example, we just talked about this scene when Glendower and Worcester and Mortimer and Hotspur are dividing up the booty. Well, that's obviously juxtaposed with the scenes of the highway robbers. That is, we're meant to get really suspicious here and to ask the question, are these great political figures no better than highway robbers? The plot seems really designed to juxtapose the two and make us see the parallels. That arguing over the money among the robbers is very similar to arguing over the division of the land under the rulers or the would-be rulers. And I think it's Shakespeare's great daring that in a play that tries to present political life as heroic, he's willing to create such parallels and leave us asking such questions. At the same time, I think the juxtaposition works to remind us of the difference between these two worlds. That yes, Shakespeare is pointing out the similarities, and that has an undercutting skeptical effect. At the same time, though, we can't help thinking, for example, how different Hotspur is from Falstaff. And I will say, I do not think that Shakespeare ever loses sight of the nature of courage. That at times he may seem to be erasing the distinction between a nobleman and a robber, but he never erases that very basic distinction, I feel, between a hero and a coward. That if anything, we come away, the very parallels remind us of the differences. That these men are quibbling in many ways a childish way, just like the robbers, but they are putting their lives on the line. And if nothing else, they are willing to fight to the death for what they're standing up for. And I don't think Shakespeare wants us to forget that difference. That the portrayal of Hotspur and Falstaff has many aspects to it, but one of them is to remind us of the difference between a hero and a coward, and that's why Hal will never completely go over to the side of Falstaff, because he will never completely lose sight of what Hotspur stands for that is genuinely noble. Okay, that's a sketch of where we're going. I'm pretty sure I'll get to Henry IV Part 2, at least by the latter half of the next lecture, and we'll be closer to being on schedule. So let's hope the snow this weekend isn't bad again. I'll see you soon.